standing up here being semi-formal is it's being recorded and will be shown on a local television station. So I always look at the clock, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes worth of comments, and then really it's your meeting to tell me what you're interested in, what your questions are, what you think the General... Am I supposed to be using this? I'm sorry. What you think the General Assembly ought to be working on this year, and I'll try to give you 4 or 5 topics that I think we are going to be interested in. I guess, first of all, for those of you not that familiar with the General Assembly, this is a long session, which means we'll be there 60 days starting January the 8th, and we finish 60 days later, sometime early March. It is a budget year, which means we'll be adopting the budget, and the numbers that I'll throw around on the budget, if we get into that in any detail, are for 2 years. We do a 2-year budget, so all the numbers are for 2 years. And we'll actually act on 2 budgets in this session. We'll do what's called a caboose budget, which finishes up the year we're in now, 12 to 14, and we just sort of clean that up. That's pretty rote, pretty non-controversial. And then we'll do the budget for 16 to 18. Governor McDonnell has put that budget in. It's about $96 billion. It's up about $10 billion over the previous budget, and there's some reasons for that. The economy is certainly a lot better. So that will pretty much dominate the session, because obviously how we spend your money and what we spend it on is what we'll be debating for a good deal. I can tell you some high points in the budget. The governor's put about another, and I'm giving you this from memory, and the budget was just released Monday, and I have not studied it. I'll be very candid with you. It's about $180 million more for higher education, which means in the last 4 years we've put about $600 million extra in higher education, and primarily that's to hold down the tuition, which the last 2 years have been the least that it has risen in the last decade. He put about $600 million extra into K through 12 and pre-K. Some of that is driven by what's called re-benchmarking. Every 2 years we re-benchmark based on student population, cost of living, inflation, that type thing, so that sort of drives a lot of it. I think you'll hear a major emphasis this year on mental health, driven to some extent by the tragedy that occurred a couple weeks ago with the senator's son and the senator himself. It's been an issue in Virginia for a couple years, and the governor's put about $38 million more into that. I think what we will be, the hot issues will be Medicaid expansion. We set up in last year's budget. In fact, I was a not a co-patron, it wasn't a bill. I co-sponsored the budget amendment that set up the Merck Commission, which is the Medicaid Innovation and Reform Commission, composed of 5 members of the House, 5 members of the Senate. And they were supposed to work out the Medicaid expansion. There are a lot of issues with it, and they were supposed to come up with various and sundry recommendations, revisions that we would ask the federal government to give us in order to proceed forward with Medicaid expansion. Very controversial. They have not been successful in doing that, so they will continue meeting on probably into January. And I would assume if they can come to no consensus, then it'll get tossed into the lap of the General Assembly, which was not the intent of the Merck Commission. They were supposed to handle it, but they've not been able to come together on it. So I suspect that will be a pretty big issue in one form or another. There's a lot of money involved in it, and it's controversial. And I think it's fair to say most everybody would agree it certainly hadn't gotten off to the best start in the world. The other issue of some significance is ethics. I don't have to tell you that the governor has been involved, unfortunately, in some ethics concerns. Big article in the Post today about it, and so I am sure that we will spend significant time tightening up the ethics standards for members of the House, the Senate, and the executive office. I can tell you, I'm not involved in it, but I can tell you for about the last couple of months, there has been a group in the House working on ethics. I'm not privy to what they've done, but I think you'll see a major proposal coming forward on that issue. Transportation, for those of you who follow the General Assembly, you know last year we passed the landmark transportation bill, which will generate about $1.5 billion a year when it's fully implemented in about 5 years. For transportation, there will be efforts to overturn that. I will resist those pretty dramatically. There was a lot of political capital spent on getting the transportation plan through. First significant increase in funding since 1986 when the General Assembly increased the gas tax, and that has been constant since then. What am I interested in per se? Well, first of all, I will be the chairman of the Transportation Committee. I expect to stay on the other 3 committees that I'm on, which is Commerce and Labor, which hears all the issues of commerce and labor, as it says, and that I'll define a little. We get all the rate studies for Dominion and Verizon and all those kind of things, all the labor issues, that type issue. It's all the banking issues come to us. So it is, as it sounds, the business committee. Education, I expect to stay on education, which deals with K through 12 and higher education. And I will probably stay on the higher education subcommittee, though I don't expect to be chairman, because if you're chair of a major committee, then you're not chair of a subcommittee. So I don't expect to remain as the chairman of that. And finally, science and technology, which deals with, as it says, the science and technology issues, which is particularly important here in the Dulles Corridor. And I say I expect to remain on those. The Speaker makes all those appointments, and he has named the chairman and the vice chairman of all the committees, but he has not named the committee members yet, and he usually does that on the first day of the session. So I have no inkling that I won't remain on those committees. I will say I'm one of a relatively few in the House that serves on 4 committees, and it gets a little hectic at times. As I said earlier on, it's a long session. We will probably see somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 pieces of legislation, which we will have to act on. And to further make that sound even more complex, we have about 30 days to do it, and then we send the bills to the Senate, and vice versa. The Senate sends theirs to ours. So the committee structure is critical to how things work down there. In other words, almost all bills will go to a subcommittee who will make a recommendation, and then it'll come up to the full committee. The full committee makes a recommendation. If these are positive, then it goes to the House floor. If it comes out of the House, it goes to the Senate, and then through the same process, and then ultimately goes to the governor, and the governor signs it or modifies it or doesn't sign it. So that's a very, very brief overview of it. Finally, the makeup of the House of Delegates, where I serve, there are 11 new members. There are 5 new committee chairmen, so there's going to be major changes in personnel there. And this, I think, is an interesting statistic. About 5% of the members of the House of Delegates have been there 4 years or less. So there's a huge learning curve for a lot of folks. What am I personally going to work on? Town Attorney Herndon is here. He's given me a piece of legislation that the town's interested in pertaining to illegal signs in the right-of-way or on public property. I'm carrying some legislation for Loudoun County, most of it related to disciplinary actions of students. I'll be carrying something for Prince William County having to do with driver education for young people. I will have a bill eliminating the hybrid tax that's in the transportation bill. I will again put in the I call it the In-State Tuition Equity Act. I will put that bill back in. And then I have some others, which right off the top of my head I can't think of, to be honest with you. We have 15 or 20 bills that are going in. I had no intention to carry that many bills with being the chairman of a major committee, but they just seem to keep rolling in. So with that as a very, very quick, and that was 7 or 8 minutes overview, this is your meeting to tell me what you're interested in and to tell me how you would like to see us act on various and sundry pieces of legislation. What do you think are the budget priorities? And it's an open floor, and I will attempt to answer any and all questions. Chuck, yes, sir.
Yes, what I want to mention is transportation.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that $1.5 billion is coming in per year in new revenue.
Yes.
What is the total amount that we get in transportation every year from all the other sources and so on?
The existing budget for transportation, and when I say transportation, you got to remember transportation is not only roads, it's transit, it's airline, not airlines, but airports. It's the big port down in Norfolk. It's metro. It's all the things that we do. We put about $4.5 billion a year into it, and does not include the 1.5. That would be on top of that. So in 5 years, you'll be looking at about $12 billion a year in transportation.
Okay. Now my second question is, since you're going to be chairman of transportation, I've been reading some of the memos that come from different sources, such as Rob Whitfield and Bruins and some other people that I see all the time on emails.
Right.
And the concern I've seen, somebody has made a statement saying that perhaps as much as 75% of the money will go to Metro Rail and only, or actually 75 to 85% will go to Metro Rail and bus service, but only 15 to 25% will go to roads. I hope that's really not true, because I've lived here in Fairfax since my wife and I got married in '68, and I've seen traffic just zoom into to something beyond LA. I used to go out to LA a lot on business trips, and this is the worst mess I've ever seen. This is worse than LA. And just to give you some idea, let's say in the morning you have to go over the Captain John Bridge. I took the Dulles Toll Road, and when you get down toward the Beltway, it goes into one lane.
Right.
And you have a one-lane exit to go north on the Beltway over to the Captain John Bridge.
Right.
That took me forever to get over there to the Captain John Bridge. The traffic around here is beyond unbelievable. Even at Interstate 66, try going on it and coming home at nighttime around 7:30 on I-66. It's chock-a-block. I found that out the other day. So I guess what I'm saying is that I know that you and others like Delegate Herndon push, to get transportation to cover these bottlenecks and gridlocks that we have. What is really being done to focus on these gridlocks and all these bottlenecks? And my second thing is, I've said this to Congressman Conley before, Congressman Wolf at various town hall meetings. I said the federal government should be paying this extra $5 billion that we need to get the silver line out there. Most of the people who are serviced are related to the federal government. They either work for the federal government or state government or county government, or they're contractors and so on. So a lot of people benefit from that. And I've said this to Congressman Conley face to face and to Congressman Wolf, that we can fritter away $60 or $70 billion in Afghanistan, but we can't have $5 billion from the federal government to complete the Metro Rail out to Loudoun County. So I'm hoping that you will, as our chairman, will put some pressure on our politicians that we have that seem to be pretty agreeable, whether they're Democrat or Republican. They seem to be pretty much agreeable to things that we need around here. And I think that people like Congressman Conley and Congressman Wolf, who both seem to me as reasonable people, we should lean on them. You with your powerful position as chairman of transportation should lean on these people to get federal funding to complete the Metro Rail, instead of gouging people on the toll road and upping the toll road prices. And what you're going to do eventually, you're going to have those people coming off the toll road and not using it anymore, and using all the other roads through Reston and everywhere else trying to get some. And I don't want to preach or anything, but as a person who drives around,
Right.
it just really annoys me. And my question to you is, what is your view on
Right.
number one? And number two, the other question is unrelated. Unfunded pension liabilities, you haven't mentioned that, because
Right.
it really galls me that we have $25 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, and you and many others can proudly say you balance the budget every year, but it's easy to balance a budget when you don't consider setting that aside, off the balance sheet, this unfunded pension liability, which seems to be growing. And I mentioned that to Senator Janet Howell and others, and it doesn't seem to really ring a bell. Maybe, my background is accounting, so maybe it really hits me, the wrong way that this thing continues to grow. And, it's a can that's been constantly kicked down the road. I know they're changing, the state is changing the pension,
Right.
the rules of
Right.
pension. So
Right.
I know they're doing that.
Right.
So it's a pile of money. It represents half the state budget in 1 year.
Well, let me.
I guess my question, I have two questions.
Okay.
What are we doing to resolve transportation around
Right.
here at the bottlenecks? And so, number two, what's being done to address unfunded pension liabilities?
Okay. Good questions, both of them. The question was, what's being done to fix transportation in Northern Virginia? And secondly, what are we doing to fix the unfunded liability in the pension funds? And I'm going to take this last one first because it's not easier to answer, but I have a shorter answer for it. Just as you said, 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, we changed the retirement pay into the system by all new employees in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Up until that point, they basically had not had to make a contribution into their own retirement. 2 years ago, we said you've got to do that, so all new employees are now contributing to their own retirement. We actually gave them a little raise at that time to sort of ease the pain a bit. But by that action alone, we've cut the unfunded liability in the pension fund by $9 billion. So we're moving in the right direction. Is it solved? No. But we took a huge step in doing that, and I would tell you, at least on the things that I see, while Virginia does have an unfunded liability, we've committed ourselves to fix it over the next 10 years, and we're in far better shape than most states that I'm aware of. So we have taken steps for it. On transportation, that'll take me a little longer to attempt to answer. One of the reasons we did the transportation bill is the very reason you said. We were ranked last year #1 in congestion in the entire nation by the Texas Institute of Transportation. So that gave some impetus to those who were not in support of it to move over. You're mixing, and it happens all the time, apples and oranges a little bit. What Rob Whitfield and those folks are talking about is the extra $1.5 billion that comes. That's not correct. The $350 million that will come to Northern Virginia out of the $1.5 billion. We have three elements in that $1.5 billion. There's about $850 million is statewide, primarily for maintenance. About $350 million come to Northern Virginia, which Northern Virginia uses, Northern Virginia raises. It's spent in Northern Virginia on projects chosen by elected officials in Northern Virginia. And the other $200 million goes to Hampton Roads for the same reason. Mr. Whitfield is talking about how the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, of which I am a member, spent or plans to spend the first $300 million. And there's some question whether these numbers are right, but I can tell you what we did do. We bought a bunch of rail cars for Metro to replace those that are unsafe. We're upgrading the power system so we can run 8-car trains, which will help improve capacity and efficiency. And so a good deal of that money went in that direction, but that's the first year only, because we didn't have what we're doing right now, which the legislation requires, is VDOT to do a ranking system of projects, and all kinds of projects, road projects, transit projects, rail projects, bus projects, to see which ones give us the most congestion relief and access in case of a national emergency. Those are the two criteria. And then we will base our future decisions on that. There will certainly be significant, in my opinion, highway improvements in that. The specific area you're talking about, and I'm in the weeds now, and I know that, and Anna's in the back, and she always accuses me of getting too much in the weeds. The 300 or the 350 million is then divided into two pieces. 70% the NVTA keeps for the big projects, the 66, the 28s, the 50s, the Route 7s, and then 30% flows back to local government to do the various kind of things that you're talking about, the right turn lanes, the left turn lanes, the signalization, fixing the bottlenecks. Are we going to fix the problem overnight? No, we didn't get in this situation overnight, but we'll get there in a period of time. Give you a couple of local examples. In that plan that we just approved is major improvements, another lane on Route 28, which I think most everybody agrees we need, another lane on Route 50, another lane on Route 7. Those kinds of things are long-term. They're big dollar items. So that's in a nutshell where the money's going.
The extra lane of Route 50 is going west of 28 you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Good questions, thanks. Other questions? I think you had some.
Well, I had one, sir, probably kind of related to this, but on a much smaller scale. First of all, congratulations on your recount. I'm glad you're exploring.
Thank you. Thank you.
My home is in Drainsville.
Mm-hmm.
It backs up onto Fairfax County Parkway.
Mm-hmm.
I am my homeowners association, Mr. Andy Fritz,
Mm-hmm.
a great guy.
Yeah.
Has explained to me that our desire for a sound wall against Highway Fairfax County Parkway, we have been told it's been looked at and it's not going to happen. Thank you for asking. Don't ask anymore. And I understand that, but I also see personally that things are changing, as we've just spoken about here. Fairfax County Parkway, as I understand it, the standard is once it goes from a 4-lane to a 6-lane where I live, which is right at the buttress of Highway 7 in Fairfax County, it's still 4 lanes. And to paint the picture a little better, the far side has their 14, 15-foot sound wall. So it's the haves and have-nots, as many people in the homeowner association think about it at times, or seem to. I was just curious of how can I, as a citizen, kind of make that heard as I look around. Things are changing. Highway 7's getting wider. Would that be enough to constitute another sound survey? Is that not going to change the decks at all? Just trying to get a sense for where that is.
For the audience, the question was specifically sound walls in a particular subdivision on Fairfax County Parkway near its intersection with Route 7, and then a more general question, I think, about how are sound walls determined when they go. If there's federal money involved, there has to be a study determine if sound is above a certain elevation or a certain decibel level, which I don't know what it is. And if it is, then sound walls are warranted and they're part of the project. I would say on Route 7, and we'll verify all this with VDOT. If you'll leave your name or if you signed up out here, we'll verify this. Part of the study for Route 7, when they go from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, they will, and I'm pretty sure there's federal money involved in that, they will have to do a sound study because
I believe they actually are. And
okay.
Seem to be putting up the
okay.
barriers.
Now on Fairfax Parkway, and I think I'm right on this, that was built by Fairfax County and not the state of Virginia. And so you would need to talk to your local supervisor about a sound wall there. And again, the process is it usually takes a change in condition for, in other words, if they went out and they added more lanes to Fairfax Parkway, they would then probably do a sound study or a sound wall study and come up with an answer. I will tell you that, and I'm not telling you this is the solution to all problems, but we did have VDOT do a study of what's called quiet pavement. and we've got 3 test areas of it. One of them is on Route 7 up in the Leesburg area, and then there are a couple others around the state. And what we're hoping to determine from that is when they repave and things like that, they'll go with the quieter pavement, and it helps depress the sound. Now, will it eliminate sound walls? No, probably not. But we are looking at that, but we'll get back with you and make sure I'm not mistaking something here.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Richard, do you have anything?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Sinclair. Mr. Sinclair is a junior at North Carolina and a Herndon High School graduate.
Exactly.
And you never know it from that shirt he's got on.
I hear that. So my question is also related to transportation.
Yes.
A lot of people talk about roads and Metro Rail. My question is sort of from a more statewide perspective. What is being done for freight rail? I got the chance to talk to some folks on the railroad in Virginia, and they said that Virginia is probably the most progressive state in the nation when it comes to funding freight rail. So in your role as chairman of the Transportation Committee, how are you going to ensure that stays there, and how that can play a role in alleviating congestion? When you think of stuff like one rail car is like roughly equivalent to 2 trucks. So how do you see Virginia state government working with freight rail?
Okay, the question was, how do I see Virginia state government working with the railroads, which are private, in an effort to relieve congestion by getting trucks off the roads? Let me be careful when I say we. Between the state of Virginia, the local railroads, I think Norfolk Southern, but do not hold me to that, down in the ports area, just did major rail upgrades down there, including raising the tunnel so you can get the double-deck cars through. And the reason for that is the port in Hampton Roads is the only port on the East Coast that is capable today of taking these giant ships that are going to come through the Panama Canal in a couple of years. We already have a 55-foot draft down there, and if we ever need to go deeper, we can, because there's not rock under it. And Savannah is working on it, and I think New York is thinking about it, but they got so much rock up there. So we have prepared ourselves to the extent we can by upgrading substantially the freight railroad in that corridor, which I think goes all the way to Chicago. Another study that has been looked at, and nothing's been funded on it, is to substantially upgrade the track that essentially follows 81 through the Shenandoah Valley for the same reason, to get primarily the containers off the trucks and on the cars and get them to the inland port up in Front Royal, Virginia. All of that comes under the Department of Rail and Public Transit, which this is not rail, but just in the last couple of years we have put in place a passenger service from Lynchburg to Richmond to Washington. We now have Amtrak coming up from Norfolk all the way up from Richmond up into Washington. Now that's passenger, not freight, but I think what you said about Virginia being very progressive on freight is right. And as the chairman of transportation, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that stays that way, because, as you said, for every truck we can take off the road, that, I think, number one, makes things safer. Number two, helps remove some of the congestion we got, particularly on 81. Anybody been down 81 lately? That's pretty tough out there. Other questions, comments? Well, thank you for coming. I will say we will be in Richmond starting the 7th of January, and we're going to have the same phone number. If you call to the local office here, it will roll over to Richmond. We would invite you to come down at any time. It's not only to see the General Assembly, quote unquote, in action, but to see the Capitol itself. And this gives me the opportunity to say that we're the oldest continuous sitting legislature in the Western Hemisphere. We've been in session since 1619, and the building we're in was designed by Thomas Jefferson, and we have been in it since 1788, and it is a spectacular building, and we spent about $125 million on it 3 or 4 years ago and took it back with all, of course, modern appurtenances, but as close to how Mr. Jefferson had designed the paints and everything else as possible. It's a beautiful building. It's your building. I invite you down to see it. I will say we have a new governor coming in, a new lieutenant governor, a new attorney general. He's been very gracious to me. He's talked to me 2 or 3 times during the campaign, and then he invited me down 2 weeks ago, plus or minus, and we spent about 45 minutes one-on-one talking about things he was interested in and things I'm interested in, and I think he's got a lot to learn, and that's human nature, but I think he's got the right attitude, and I'm looking forward to working with him, and we'll keep Virginia moving. And I'll end with this. I think he's picking up Virginia in a good spot. We do, as Chuck says, we do balance our budget. We have one of 11 states in the nation with a AAA bond rating. We don't deficit spend. We limit our borrowing to only capital facilities and our payback of 5% of the general fund. I will tell you the one thing that a lot of us are very worried about, and that is the increase, regardless of what happens with Medicaid. Set that aside. Medicaid now takes 22% of the general fund of the Virginia budget. Between 2012 and 2014 and the governor's proposal for 14 to 16, there was a 32% increase in it. We have got to do something to get that under control. And it will be tough and it will be difficult, but I think we'll probably take that on this year. And with that, I want to thank you so much for coming out. I know this is a terrible time of the year, and I apologize for that, but between my schedule and finding an available room, it had to be tonight, and we did want to hear from you before we go down. I always welcome your thoughts and your suggestions as we look at bills, and would certainly welcome you sending us. We take phone calls, we take letters. Believe it or not, there are still letters written, but we get an awful lot of emails, and they're all important to us. So with that, thank you so much. Have a happy, yes ma'am.
Delegate Frost, I just want to say that I think Herndon is a privileged community, and having you as our delegate,
Well,
and I'm sure you're going to do your best those coming 60 days of confinement.
60 days, yes. Thank you for saying that. That's very kind of you. Okay, thank you so much. Everybody have a great holiday session, and I do appreciate you coming. Thanks a lot.